Welcome to the Nexus Unloaded podcast. This is Will Crozier.
And I'm Nikki Westcombe. We are the founders of Nexus Performance. Joining us on this wild ride is our heavyweight coaching team, ready to unleash their expertise to solve any problems in your journey to getting strong and jacked.
Through our real-world experience, we hope to break things down in a digestible, applicable, and entertaining way.
So pump up the volume and let's get into this.
The old mystery injury.
It's the only thing that's helping my heel.
Mystery injuries are an unfortunately common thing, as in when you didn't actually do anything.
I woke up yesterday morning and it was in agony.
How old are you now?
27. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, a few more years, you'll have lots of mystery injuries.
Yeah, but I was just limping around, anti-inflams. I still came and squatted.
Yeah.
No issue. It only hurt once. I couldn't hinge though. I couldn't shift into my heel.
Yeah, so you said it's more heel-based injury.
It's more similar to what I did through prep. It's more hammy, peroneals. Everything that I was sussing out this morning seems like it's peroneal tendinopathy.
Tibial IR.
Yeah, I got none, which is good.
Join the club.
Yeah.
It's good.
Works well.
But on that note, over the weekend, you and I were both
firstly, welcome back.
You have to drop it in when people pass the intro and people are already listening.
Yeah, we didn't say it at the start.
Yeah.
It's us. If you're listening, you probably know it's us.
Yeah. You're at the APL Queensland state titles over the weekend.
Yes.
For the length of both days, the long length of both days, big comps. Technically 4 comps because they did the 2-a-day kind of thing.
2 sessions a day, yeah.
And you had how many lifters?
8.
8 lifters. Big days. But
7 till 6 both days.
You had we won't go through each individual person now, but really good days, as in the lifters, from what I saw across the board, mostly in that 8 or even 9 out of 9 sort of days.
Yeah, I think
obviously
7 out of 9 was the lowest.
Yeah, which still is
still pretty good. I was
day.
Still pretty happy with that. Yeah. Pretty much everyone PB'd every lift or comp PBs.
Definitely. Even Kiva pulled out a conventional. Put out the conventional life.
Everyone was talking to me about that. That was the talk of the afternoon.
Yeah.
Because even I think Thomas on the live stream said, "Yep, we're going to see a big sumo here."
Yeah.
And Kiva walked out and did conventional, and they were like, "Oh, I guess not."
Well, he's not exactly the most social media putting it out there. He does post up some stuff.
He posts up some stuff, but it's not as widely spread. A lot of people don't know that Kiva actually injured his hip quite badly, which had him pull out of. He was originally supposed to do Christmas Cup, and we had to pull out of Christmas Cup because he injured his hip quite badly.
Yep.
Squatting, funnily enough. However, squatting didn't trigger it. It was sumo that triggered it.
Yeah.
So we essentially had to go with the only thing we could do, which was hinging.
Yeah.
And he had a fairly strong Romanian. I think his best Romanian was 210 for 6.
Not bad at all. Fuck, that's strong.
At under 90.
Yeah.
So it wasn't too bad. So I was like, mate, everyone makes comments on the size of your glutes. They're quite strong.
Yeah.
Let's just do conventional for this prep, see what happens, and still managed to pull 280, which is 20 kilos under his best in 12 weeks.
And it's 285, no?
No, 280.
And 20 kilos under, which is over 90%. It'd be 93% or some shit like that.
Very, very strong. Yeah.
Within 12 weeks to get back to 93% of your best off stance kind of deadlift, we'll absolutely take that any day of the week.
With PR squat and PR bench.
Yeah, and we'll continue down the conventional route.
Yeah. So we're going to run conventional and a nats. I just said to him, there's no point changing it now. We're 12 weeks out.
These comps are coming on quick.
Yeah. We knew everyone who was doing states, I said, it's going to be a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
It's basically prep to prep.
Yeah. Big 4-day nationals.
Yeah.
It's going to be big.
Yeah, it's going to be big.
Down in that tight warm-up room, unless they've changed it. But
it's because it's over 4 days. I think it's going to be less people.
Okay.
Because there's not going to be masters and juniors within the same flights, whereas last year there was masters and juniors in those flights as well.
Oh, okay.
So it's like juniors,
Put it on
opens,
their own day.
and masters. They've got 2 days, Thursday, Friday. Yep.
Oh,
That was the
hectic.
whole point of opening up the days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they've
Crazy.
now changed it to 4 days, which I think is going to be really cool. It's going to be long, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
4 days back-to-back comp, and then I fly out to Japan. So that's
Yeah.
all I'm hanging out for.
Yeah, that's all right. Finish completely ruined, fly over, chill out.
The last day of the comp's my birthday.
What a wonderful birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hanging out with sweaty people
You'll enjoy it.
in an auditorium.
Hopefully with lots of PBs, you know.
Sounds like Mickey's birthdays for the last 10 years.
Yeah. Mickey's birthday always fell and
Pro Raw
has
weekend.
always fallen on Pro Raw. So the weekend that is about usually myself competing there and leading up to being a super, not a bad stressful time, but a stressful time being prep. And then the day, obviously, like I'm locked into my own world. Comp is a stressful time, usually even more so for the partners. I'm usually like way less stressed, and then she's like freaking out. So that's been her birthday for, the 10-ish years, whatever it's been.
Nice.
And this year she had, I wasn't competing, and she got to skip it,
Yeah.
go and do stuff with her family on that day, and I got to go to Pro Raw and help out. So, yeah. Anyway, but I think that'll continue in the future. Pro Raw is always going to be there, I think. So she looks forward to even more in the future.
I bet she can't wait.
Yeah.
Very excited long term.
Just very quickly, even though that would have been a good segue out of Kiva's deadlift into this topic, but we have to touch on Pro Raw really quickly because Pro Raw wasn't the weekend just gone, but the weekend before. And we did have a solid team go down to that. We had some, it's Pro Raw, so great lifting, great PBs again. It wasn't the best day for everybody. I wouldn't say it was as many successful attempts as that one, but that wasn't just our guys. That was across the whole comp. It was a pretty oddly hot day for Melbourne. It was a couple of people cut some weight. It's a 2-hour weigh-in. There's just a couple more variables at play, and so I guess just not only within our team but the whole thing. There was just like a lot of kind of average days and people kind of well off their best numbers, which was interesting. But it seemed to be a common theme throughout, not just isolated to our team. So that made me feel a little bit better.
Start questioning.
Yeah, what am I doing?
What's been in the water?
Yeah. But no, it was a good day. We still walked away with a couple of trophies and stuff, and still some really big lifting.
Yeah. It's never not going to be a big day down there, I don't think. There's just always so much going on.
It's one of those days where, in the high-level comps are like this, in that, how if you go to, States on the weekend, I think the biggest deadlift attempted was 300 on the dot.
That was Sunday Arvo. There was a few 300 pluses.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, for that anyway, 300 was the biggest attempt, and it made a huge kind of impact on the room. Everybody was like, "Fuck, let's go!" And Kiva especially was fucking.
Kiva had finished by that point, so he was stoked.
He was more excited for that 300 than the guy himself was. But yeah, that biggest lift of the day brings a lot of energy to it. Whereas a Pro Raw, in the big guys flight, there was multiple, a fair few squats over 400, which is typically quite a sight, I guess. Squatting 400 isn't exactly
number.
Yeah. It's not something you see every day. If you can't go down to World's Gym and see that's for sure. But so you think people would be excited, but because there was a heap, it's kind of it's people are still excited, but it's not as people are 400 again. This guy's only doing 400, next guy's doing 420. What a pussy!
It becomes a bit more normal.
Yeah. You get sucked into and it's actually the same at every pro comp. When I went to the American Pro 2, some of the best lifters in the world at that, and the first guy in the flights doing obscene numbers, and you're like, oh, fucking look at this weakling, because he's you know what I mean?
He's the weakest of the bunch.
Poor guy is he's just come out of primary school, and he's coming to high school as the big dog, but then you suddenly you're a small kid again,
back at the bottom.
Yeah, so man, it's fun.
There was one dude Sunday morning who under 110. And this was drug tested nationals as well, mind you.
States.
Yep, the States. And drug tested States. And he squatted 330.
Not bad.
I was just like, okay,
yep.
cool. not a bad day out. And yeah, exactly that. Like walk out of a combo rack. Like the energy was mental. They used just a power bar.
Yep.
It's crazy. Everyone was just like, what the fuck? Because they hadn't seen a lift that big all weekend.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's I miss those small vibes. Like even the weekend, even though I was completely ruined from Peru and not Fest, I went down to. So yeah, pretty tired coming into it, but it was like still a really good vibe in there. Like a lot of people just like super supportive. Those state comps are like that. I like it because the local comps just bring a little bit more. Like their families are there, and this is very. I don't know. Just feels like a really supportive environment typically.
Yeah, I think
I'm not
it's
saying
cool.
the big comps aren't like that. They are super supportive still, but it's just different. You're talking like it's just a different level, sort of. Like it's less about fun and more about just like super competitiveness at that top level.
Yeah.
The local comps are more quote unquote fun.
Yeah,
like
I agree.
People
100%.
are vibing more. Yeah,
it's a good day out. Had a wonderful weekend. Both of us did 2 weekends in a row. Clearly, now we got another big weekend with SBD workshop, and then I think we get a couple weekends break.
Well, when was the last time you presented a workshop-y?
Would have been our hypertrophy workshop in September.
Yeah,
August. No, September. Somewhere around there.
Yeah, and I did one with Anthony, Chris and I down in Melbourne, which was an SBD one, very similar to what we're going to do. And yeah, but fuck, it's going to be a good time.
I think it's going to be really fun. We got a decent amount of people coming in. It's the first time we've done SBD.
Yes, altogether.
It's a lot longer than we normally would run.
Yeah.
So it's going to be on.
Yeah. I would say come down, but by the time this comes out,
yeah, you guys won't be there.
Absolutely.
We spoke about it last week on the podcast, so it's fine.
Yeah, good. Let's get on to today's topic. So like we spoke about not too long ago, we talked about squat issues. Just kind of like common errors or issues, like things that pop up in squats, limiting factors. And we're going to talk about in a similar way, deadlifting today. So I've written down 5 different sort of just like common things that people get wrong or that like pop up in a squat.
Yep.
In a deadlift that people view as a bad thing, whether it is good or bad, or whether it just is how it is. I'm just going to kind of work our way through them. So the first one, I thought I put this one at the start because it kind of plays into the others a fair bit. Is just foot and grip placement in general. Now, this is something less that I deal with people online because the people who I typically deal with online have done powerlifting for a few years, and after a few years, not always, but most of the time, like you fucked around with your stance and with your grip width on the deadlifts, and you've found what works for you. And also like it's a little bit more universal than on a squat. Like squatting tends to be like a lot of people standing wide, narrow, medium, whatever, all over the joint and doing it very well. Whereas deadlifting, the internet would, you Google like where should I stand, and it'll give you, hey, your feet should be under your hip width apart, and toes slightly flared out, and then your hands just outside that. As vertical as they can be, essentially, without getting in the way of your legs. So it's a pretty realistically like a fantastic start point, and probably a good point for most people to be in. I know that when I started deadlifting many years ago, I literally did that. I just looked it up and I was like, how do you deadlift? And then it told me, and voila, like it literally, that's what I do. Still to this day, if you look at my deadlift, it's hip width, slightly toned out, hand grip is just outside the knurling on both sides, which is pretty much under my shoulders, maybe a touch wider. And I realistically, even in all the weight that I put on and off and stuff, or the fluctuate over the years, haven't had to change it a whole lot. But
consistency.
There are people that do quickly. So like if you're not outside the norm, you can probably stick to what I just said. If you are like a normal sized human or whatever, the toe turning out and little adjustments to that, obviously, you can play around with that stuff, and you can play to your strengths a little bit more. But for the most part, that's going to work for most people. Recently being in the gym here and seeing people, newbies come in and not really knowing where to start or what to do, and people of lots of different shapes and sizes. I've been finding myself having to get people to experiment with it a little bit more.
Yep.
Like we've had a couple of members that are on the bigger side, whether that's jacked bigger or having a little bit of a belly bigger. And they're the sort of people who are going to have to typically go outside of those typical recommendations. Because when you have a bit of a belly going, or when you are just fucking huge and you have, tree trunks for legs or some shit, in a conventional stance anyway, like you have to, like things just get in the way.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
As in, like if I bend down to try and touch my toes, or do like an RDL type motion with a belly, if I have a beer gut going, it's going to like run into my knees and then because I'm trying to get more range of motion, but like there's a physical block there, I'm going to get it through somewhere else, which is typically like rounding your back over, or kind of squatting more, and you just have to. So typically those people,
they go the real wide.
They have to go
Eddie Hall style.
Yeah, they have to go wide, wider stance to kind of open up the legs and allow for a bit of room. And then obviously your legs are running into your arms if you don't move them. So you have to take your grip out further as well, which makes it even more range of motion. And then through those adjustments, because you're wider grip, wider stance, usually looks better, but you have to adapt and kind of go into I want to say like a more, without having a visual here, like a more squattier deadlift.
Yeah, you stay a little bit more vertical.
Yeah. And then
you're able to get a little bit more like forward knee travel almost.
Yeah. And it just, those people that just have to be balanced out in that way and kind of like move around themselves. So yeah, if you are an Eddie Hall or you are a gigantic strongman, or do you do like a few too many beers on the weekend and have a bit of a belly going, then that's some of the adjustments that you're going to have to make.
Yeah.
Sumo, I would say a little bit more variety in people's stances there. Yeah.
Definitely in relation to like leg length and things like that. I think, like I know we talk a lot about like morphology shouldn't necessarily dictate certain things in some of the lifts and things like that. Like we shouldn't look at that as the main thing. But I find that like with sumo lifters in particular, they're generally the ones where like morphology will come into play for them a lot more, I reckon.
It's
like
not like
long-limbed boys, and
it's still only like if you look at the differences between the most narrow dude and the widest dude, like it's still not like it's crazy.
Not a huge difference.
You're still going to be on the bar somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. No, but you just see these like 5 foot people trying to do sumo, and their feet are obviously going to be in a lot more, or they're just stretched the fuck out. And then you got
Kiwi used to have like toes literally on the plate, didn't he?
Yeah, he used to get in trouble for that in comps.
Really?
Well, because he had to jump and move his feet out of the way.
I reckon that's
to ensure the plates didn't land on it. And I know he got done twice for dropping the bar.
It's a skill, I reckon.
Yeah.
No, I remember Aaron Sim, ex-client of mine, ex-powerlifter.
Ex-gym owner.
Very wide stance, sumo, same thing, toes on the plate. And used to have to do the jump back in. And he, for people that don't know what we're referring to, like when you're dropping the bar, obviously if your toes are starting in that position, cutting it awfully close as to where that bar lands. If you're a centimetre left or right, it's not going to be a good time. So those two other people will scoot their legs back in kind of as the bar is falling. And yeah, some rule books would say, I don't know, but fucking stupid if you're getting red lighted for that, in my opinion. But here at Pro Rule one year, there was a little bit of baby powder on the platform, which isn't uncommon at a powerlifting comp, especially in multi-day powerlifting comp. No matter how much you mop that bitch, there's still some on there, trust me. And being a super wide stance with a lot of lateral force going on, I remember he pulled it and then locked it out. And then as he went to put it down, like he went to jump back in, but obviously as he jumped, like it's a lateral force sort of thing to jump back in. And it's just slipped out further, kind of like he ended up getting most of the way out of the way, but he ended up fucking like landing it on his toe, and then he had like a big ass dirty mank black toe for well, toes take a long time, so
toes suck.
Yeah.
I've broken both my pinky toes and they're just shit.
That wasn't the reason why he stopped powerlifting, but I reckon it was up there and he's probably thinking it.
Plus he doesn't feel his thumbs anymore. Probably doesn't help, does it?
Yeah, the thumbs and the toes. Just
my thumbs are starting to hinder my Xbox ability at the moment. It's making me sad.
Yeah.
Hook boys.
Can't jump between them. What, between the buttons?
I
Not as
can't
fast?
like move very quick. So I'm like steering and it's just
Feeling it out.
slow.
Nah, not much sense.
You got to turn
Crazy.
steering sensitivity
You know?
up.
Yeah, if you're a pro gamer, don't go hook gripping, I guess.
Yep. You heard it here first. But I guess on that,
Do you have any more on it?
Yeah, well, just you said yourself that like you work predominantly with people who come to you and they've been powerlifting for a few years. They've nutted it out. They've played the game on where feet should be, blah, blah, blah. Myself, I probably work more, I guess, face-to-face with the people who haven't necessarily had that experience.
Yeah.
And coming to it from the perspective of like, okay, cool, what is one way that we can look at this to try and make it as similar as possible without having to like, okay, we need to move your foot 0.05 centimeters, this one, blah, 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 blah. As you said, right? Like the basic stance, roughly hip width, toe slightly turned out.
Yeah.
Perfect. But if you're roughly hip width, toe slightly turned out, and the bar's dissecting your toes, probably going to be a little bit too far behind the bar.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're standing in the same stance, but your shins are touching the bar from the very start, probably going to be a little bit too close.
Yeah.
So
consistency of your
somewhere
stance
along, somewhere
bar.
along the lines of like exactly that. Roughly hip width, toe slightly turned out. I like to use the cue bar dissecting shoelaces because for most people, their shoelaces is roughly where their midfoot is.
Yeah.
We pretty much want the bar over midfoot for both the balance perspective and also so you're not too far behind or in front. From there, that's generally a pretty good understanding about like where they need to be with that bar.
Yeah. Plus, it's also, if you know what you're looking for, easy to modify on that.
Yes.
It's just that the lifters themselves will typically be able to pick up on it too, but they just don't know what they're looking for.
Yeah.
As in, like, you go, hey, do you feel like you're getting dragged on your toes, or do you feel like you're getting, leaning back behind the bar, kind of, and like pulling the bar into your shins? Does either one of those two things happen? Or is the bar like rolling away from, like, things like that can be very obvious as to whether they need to shift the bar further or closer, further away or closer to their shins as well in their start position. And then it's like you said, consistency. And we can talk about good technique all day and what it should be, but I would rather somebody who's like not perfect technique or whatever, but the same fucking every time than somebody who like nails it every 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, I think people underestimate the power of consistency, and even myself personally, like I've over the years, even since I've started with you, like as well, I had fucking so many issues with my deadlift. It was just so inconsistent all the time. Some weeks were good, some weeks were bad. I could take the slack, I couldn't take the slack. I'd shift into my hips, I'd shift one hip. I just could never really nut it out. And I made progress, like my deadlift went up quite a bit. And it wasn't until I did switch to hook grip, which meant in terms of overall setup, it just became so fluid and consistent every single week that in the space of like 9 months, I added 30 kilos to it.
And still has more to go, I think.
We still, I reckon, plenty more to go. I reckon I could probably pull the same at nearly 20 kilos lighter. So, like that in itself, like the power of consistency and things like that, like even if you don't have that perfect technique, nailing your consistency every single week, you're going to make better progress than like if you just try and come in every week and like chop and change and try one thing or don't do the same thing as week to week and things like that. And that's just all it comes down to.
Yeah. And this discussion will carry into these next points because there's a lot of it that's the same. Like ideally, when we talk like good technique within a bandwidth, generally, like you said, you want it to be over the middle of your foot so that you stay balanced, so you don't get pulled forward onto your toes, you don't get pulled back onto your heels. There's vertical force into the ground, so that bar's moving up. Like you'll see a lot of people kind of like trying to create tension or slack pull in the bar and kind of like just swinging off it. And then it'll just drag up their shins and they'll stiff leg the crap out of it or round over or whatever. Like, all these kind of issues that look like different issues, but it's a similar issue. But we're just trying to create even and vertical force into the ground and not just be like rushed and Yankee and like you said, the same consistent every time. And if we can tick those boxes, a lot of good things are going to happen. But we're going to go through into a couple others here and it'll kind of paint a better picture of to exactly what like kind of good is. So the next one here, again, if you haven't nailed this, you're probably not ever going to have a good deadlift realistically.
Bad hinge.
Bad hinge. And bad is probably a bad word. But like a hinge where you're not.
It's a bad word, only because.
But all of us know what a bad hinge is. You know what I mean? It's hard to say.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't want to put these good and bad labels on it. We've said in the podcast plenty of times that like it's more of a pro-con thing. But this is something where like when I'm saying a bad hinge, I'm saying not a hinge at all. As in like people will try to hinge and it isn't. They're not actually hinging. They're just like rounding over at their back, or they're just fucking squatting. They're bending their knees more. They're not actually going through hip flexion and hip extension in the way that they think they are. So that's what we're referring to when we say bad hinge. So a lot of people just don't have this ability to do that. Like they just an RDL, whether it's because of past injuries or past conceptions or things they've been told that have set things off in their head, or just like some people just have a huge lack of awareness because they were never like sporty as a kid, like never developed any like fucking concept of themselves in space. You tell a person to hinge, they just kind of bend their back over, or they bend their knees and squat, or they do some fucking funky ass shit.
Yeah, it always blew my mind when I was first starting out as a trainer, and things like back extensions, RDLs, etc. You kind of just, I don't know how to explain it. You kind of just know how to do it. Mm-hmm. Like if you know how to hinge, like you just kind of know how to hinge from your hips.
Yep.
That's how you do it. And you tell someone to hinge and they just straight bend over, all spine. Their hips barely move through space whatsoever. And you're like, okay, good.
Yeah, this is always a bit difficult for me too, because it always came supernatural to me.
Work this out. And then I remember just having conversations, and it never came from a place of being like, why do you not get it? But it was always like, okay, but like when I tell you to hinge, or when I ask you to do a hinge movement, what actually do you think about? Like what thought process runs through your head to try and execute that effectively? And sometimes it was just, they were just like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. I'm just like, okay, good. This is interesting. I'm like, okay, now what about through our hips? Like put your hand on your right hip, on your left hip.
Yep.
And bend from there. And they're like, oh, okay.
Yep.
But yeah, as you said, like using the term bad, good, etc. Obviously we don't necessarily want to do that. We know we've spoken about that on the podcast before, but yeah, you definitely can tell the difference between someone who knows how to hinge and someone who doesn't know how to hinge.
Well, for somebody who doesn't, who walks in and squats their deadlift, or for,
stiff legs,
whatever it is, but to you, it's, well, how do we identify in your mind anyway, like somebody that can't, other than just like those things coming out, but like, is there something that in your years of experience people do that is just like makes it super obvious to you that they need to work on it? And then from that, like, how do we work on it?
Generally, if someone's like a newer trainee, the first thing I'll get them to do is either a B stance or a dumbbell RDL. Just quite honestly, just to see how they hinge, like more than anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes a back extension can be super good as well, but they need to understand where their hips are first.
Yeah.
To know how to bend through them.
Yeah, back extension suffers from not knowing how to use the machine sometimes as well.
That's where I tend to lean more towards either a B stance or a normal dumbbell RDL. Because I like a B stance RDL because it shows you unilaterally that they can hinge effectively through both hips, etc., drive hip extension, how their feet are placed, etc., how if they they keep their legs super straight versus they try and squat into it a little bit more, things like that. Like you can sort of assess it a bit better.
Especially if they have previous injuries like a bad knee.
Yeah, exactly. Like it gives you a little bit more room to play around with and sort of help teach that pattern. And I know when we've done our deadlift workshop, that's one of the first things we run through is this is a B stance RDL.
Definitely always run through RDLs of some variant.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how to explain it. You can kind of just tell.
Yeah.
Like when you get someone to start moving and you start to assess their movement as they're just moving around the gym, as they're maybe picking up weights, putting weights on things, just moving in general, you can start to get a bit of a picture as to what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think an RDL is an easy way to see where it is. Just lumbar rounding, just kind of like not really seeing back at all, just kind of like moving forward in space and then getting onto their toes and stuff like that. And there's no reason why that exercise itself can't be, you don't have to regress things to hell to get progression. Sometimes you do. But usually they're very low level people like fucking rehab or like grandma or something that are going to go down that path too hard. But most people in my experience can learn how to RDL from doing RDLs, learn how to hinge from doing RDLs, even though it is a fairly loadable, quote unquote, higher level exercise to some degree. But just yeah, teaching people to be evenly weighted on the feet, maybe a little bit more biased towards heels. Keeping a consistent knee angle, as in like we want a little bit of bend, but I don't want you to bend that anymore.
Yeah.
I put people up against like a bench or something, so they can feel themselves running into the bench if their knees do come forward, if they start to squat more. So like giving them literally a physical constraint for their knee. And then just karate chop not physically, but to say like, hey, imagine you're going to get karate chopped in the hip joint. Your knees are going to say still remember, and I just want you to fold and try and bring like your belly or your abs or whatever it is towards your thighs. I want you to close that gap, and then obviously demonstrating that. But just trying to I want to lengthen the hip in that way, and then. Yeah, if people want to bend their knee, or depending on how that presents after that is like where we go. But it's typically not that hard after a couple of goes at it to move somebody towards it.
No, I remember when we taught it at uni, and I guess this comes from more of like the rehabby type perspective. Doing XFIS was, okay, this is how we're going to teach a hip hinge, and they would like get the person on the floor with a band around their hips,
really
like kneeling,
like a glute bridge.
No,
kneeling. Oh, kneeling.
Kneeling. They put the band around their hips for the proprioceptive ability, and they like pull it lightly as the person folds like a book. Is essentially how they would say it, and that was how they would teach. They're like, "This is how you teach hip hinge," and I was like, "Why can't you just do an RDL?" And they're like, "No, because if they can't pass this test, then they have to do this." And I remember at the time, I actually failed all the tests, and they're like, "Oh, you shouldn't do RDLs." And I was like, yeah, but I RDL 220 kilos.
Yeah.
I deadlift 280.
Yeah, the old pass the test.
And they're like, oh, but your hips. And I'm like, yeah, but
it's a very gatekeepy thing.
It's an odd test.
And it's just that phenomena across all of fitness, not just hinging, but like you can't do this without getting to through this and these hoops first. Just is often a bad way to I think just fucking teach it. I think it just doesn't work. And then sometimes it's needed, but most of the time it's just not needed. And then B, also just like mentally just sets people up in a, like, oh, I can't do that until I do this. Like I can't, like that, just the first part of that, the can't do this. We spoke about this a little while ago. Like you talk yourself into it and you go like, oh, I can't do that. Yeah. And we've had people rock up to the gym here and they're like, oh yeah, I can't do this because somebody told me like, it'll hurt my back or whatever, which is clearly full of shit. But there's so many more pieces to that puzzle. Proper loading schemes, progression schemes on things, finding the right entry point, things we've talked about a whole heap of times that comes into like a process of teaching somebody movement or rehabbing an injury or something like that. But rarely you want to talk people out of doing exercise. You just want to kind of guide them towards maybe the better choices, but without shitting on or saying you can't do other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, I was one of the things I always ran into with uni, which was interesting. But anyway, back to hinging. I think we covered that bit pretty well.
Yeah, well, the last piece of the puzzle to say is that
really.
if you can RDL pretty well and learn to lengthen the hip and go through hip flexion, hip extension with, it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect, but pretty decent range. Like you're only going to be doing it in a deadlift anyway, which is less range than an RDL. So even if it breaks down a little bit of end range, it's like, we'll work on that. But, we can still deadlift. Then you go to the deadlift and then it's just applying it and learning how to get into that lengthened hip and to kind of build tension in the hip in your deadlift setup, which is a little bit more tricky because you've got now the knees coming into it as well, and a bar that fucking might run into your shins. So there's a couple more moving pieces in a deadlift, but typically if you can pass that RDL, then you're well and truly on your road to being able to deadlift well.
Yes.
Try not to do what you said before and say that you can't deadlift without doing an RDL. You definitely can, but it's going to be better if you can.
Deadlift well, using the correct musculature.
Cool. Lats in general is a topic. Do you want to start us off here? Because there's a couple of different opinions here that I think are all valid. That that you can kind of be on both sides of this coin and make good points for. So I think as long as you're landing in the middle ground with this topic, you're good. And the problems, like most things, are at the extremes.
Lats is interesting because I think, and I know we've spoken about this ourselves in the past. I don't know if we've spoken about it on the podcast, but one very common theme I see when people are trying to teach other people how to deadlift and use their lats is they'll put a band around the bar, attach it to something in front of them,
pull the bar away,
and they'll try and pull the bar away, and they're trying to tell them to keep the bar close to them.
Yeah.
Which, if you look at it from like the way in which they're getting into that position, most people will have a tendency to then retract a lot more through the scaps and almost like shrug the bar back to keep it close to them as well.
They're over-cueing lats.
They're over-cueing lats, which, like, again, that comes with, as you just said, like the extremes, like it comes with its own set of issues.
Yeah, too much of a good thing is not good.
Because, like, realistically, obviously, we want to try and keep our arms long. We want to try and create as much length out of them as possible.
Definitely don't want to retract.
So instead of being like retracted, we want to almost push down. And the way I teach this to people is, as they're standing there, I'll say, I just want you to push your knuckles straight to the ground and try and create your arms as long as you can.
Yeah.
Without folding forward.
Yeah.
And generally, as soon as you start to teach someone that, they're like, oh, I can feel that. And then you're kind of like, okay, cool. Now I want you to do that with the bar.
Yeah, I guess the argument on one side is that, like, you don't need to cue lats because nothing, unless somebody's pitting with a fucking band, which they shouldn't be. No one's trying to pull that bar away from you. Gravity is straight up and down. It's not a cable system or whatever. So, like, the bar is acting, the weight is vertical. So, depending on how you view it, if it's over the midfoot and all that stuff's good, you've aligned it well with your body and you're putting vertical force into the ground, then it should just travel straight up and you shouldn't have to, like, do much to keep it against you. Unfortunately, like, not everybody's built absolutely perfectly to deadlift, and not only that, but some people make mistakes, small mistakes, in this. And I also don't think it's a bad thing to, like, cue a little bit of lat activation, as in just a little bit like a pullover type sequence thing, just to brace your spine and brace the whole system as a whole. Just build more tension in general. I think it's not a bad thing.
Oh, 100%.
As long as you're not going into that state that you're talking about where you are over-cueing it and you're doing like an end range.
Almost pushing chest into extension.
Which results in over kind of, get led to a retracted state, which as soon as you go to pull anything decently heavy off the ground, if you're even half strong, is going to be way too much that for your scapular muscles, because they're pretty, I wouldn't say small, but they're, nowhere near as strong as your hips and everything. It's just going to pull you back out anyway. So, like, there's no point trying to retract because it's just not a strategy that's going to work once it gets heavy.
Yeah. I 100%, like, I use my lats. I think about my lats when I deadlift. I probably set my lats in a little bit more of an unorthodox way than most people would. I've just worked it out that the sequence for me works quite well. I kind of almost come up into like a shrug to lock the lats down as I pull myself through, kind of thing. And that's, for me, that's just how I've pretty much always deadlifted. And that's worked for me. Yeah. Like, some people might look at that and go, oh, that's wrong because you're moving a lot. And I'm like, yeah, but it works for me. Yep. I've built it up over however many years. As you said, like, we spoke about this on the weekend. We looked at a couple of people's deadlifts and we just said, okay, well, if they're already getting pulled into that slightly flexed position, then why don't we just start there?
Yeah, and whether you are a little bit more extended in your thoracic or flexing your thoracic, or however that presents for you, is favorable for you, you can still get a little bit of light tension and brace the whole system a little bit anyway. I just tell people, like if I was trying to tickle you from behind or whatever, I want you to kind of, like, cover your armpits or whatever, something along those lines, something very simple that tells the person, hey, I want a little bit of tension there, but I don't want you to absolutely, take it to extremes.
Yeah. The other one I used to use way back in the day was break the bar. That would be how I would essentially cue lats for people. Yeah. And that was before a time when I knew what I was cueing. Yeah. I was just told,
what you're told.
Tell them to break the bar. And I was kind of like, I tried it myself. I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, bending the bar, break the bar.
Yeah, bend the bar, break the bar.
Anything like that.
All that sort of stuff. But then again, like, the extreme is if you do too much of that, you then end up in that extension. So it's like just about finding that middle ground.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's also the reason why if I look at somebody's deadlift and they're already doing it to some degree, because a lot of people naturally do it because it's your arms are in a position and in a deadlift start position where your lats are pretty leveraged. And it's pretty easy to get lat engagement in that position.
Yep.
So a lot of people will just kind of naturally kind of default to that to some degree. And so it doesn't take much effort whatsoever to go just like the sort of little bit of squeeze or
something I cue too much.
No, it's not something I'm like constantly just fucking yelling at people. I'm usually more yelling at people like trying to get them to be more pushy or, start position stuff, like really trying to talk me to like way more often than I am lat stuff. But it's not bad, but it's not something that's needed for everybody.
Which I guess moves us into this next point fairly well.
Your favorite one?
Yeah, I actually love this topic, backgrounding hip shooting up.
I thought you were talking the grip strength issues.
Oh, fuck, I missed whole one. Yeah, clearly my head's working. Grip strength issues.
Yeah, your favorite. Yeah.
First. Yeah.
So you've had. See, this is another hard one for me to speak on sometimes because I haven't really had bad grip strength issues. The only grip strength issue I had was, and this is against what the general consensus is on the internet when it comes to deadlift technique, but most people on the internet would tell you to grip the bar at kind of like the base of your fingers. So kind of not in your hand, just in there. And the reason for that is the reasoning they will give is kind of like it's going to fall into that position anyway, similar to the scaps, long arms side of discussion we were just talking about. And so we may as well kind of start it there so the bar doesn't kind of roll and then cause grip issues down the track.
Yep.
That's how I used to deadlift. That's how I deadlift when I was learning to deadlift in my first comp, and probably for about 3 or 4 comps until a GPC Nationals in, I want to say like 2017, where I did a deadlift, and it could have been, looking back on it, it could have been unrelated, so this changed, but anyway, I did that, and then I felt it starting to slip ever so slightly on my left hand, which is my underhand, and although I didn't drop it, it kind of like scared me a little bit. I was like, fuck, like that was close to coming out of that hand. And so I actually swapped to putting the bar further in my palm, and kind of now whenever I deadlift, it rests up against the calluses at the kind of the base of my fingers there, but in your palm. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like grip the bar in a way that it's like pushed up against those. And kind of use those normal callousy parts in your hand as almost like a part to like for your extra grip.
Almost like a speed bump kind of thing.
Yeah. Like I find that the bar never gets out past them. The only way it's coming out of my hand when I deadlift with it there, if I lock it right, is if it rips my hand off.
Yeah.
The skin off. So, and thankfully I have enough hand care during prep that keep them nice and shave down those calluses so that they don't rip as much. Yeah. So underrated part of grip strength is keeping fucking your skin in good condition. Trust me. So that's the only problem I've had with grip, and it didn't even lead to a grip failure. So it just kind of like scared me a touch, and I haven't dropped any other deadlifts.
Yeah.
But you've had a few.
Yeah, I had my initial issues were less from my grip and more from my inability to supinate my hands.
Yeah.
So I can't externally rotate my hand enough to do switch grip properly. And
you kind of grip it on an angle almost.
Yeah, it would always cause me to, as soon as I go to take tension, it would always almost like cause me to shift into my opposite hip, which then led to a bunch of back and QL issues on this side.
Helicopter a bit, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then so for me, it was like, okay, every time I seem to want to go heavy, the same issue arises. Why don't we just try hook grip? And I remember when we did the first session of hook grip, and it was the worst experience of my life for like the first 6 weeks because I just could not wrap my head around it. No consistency. Some weeks were perfect and I'd nail it. I had about 10 different people giving me advice on how to do it and
watched every video
what to do. I was watching every video I possibly could. Yeah. I was doing everything. And then one day you sent me a video, I think it was Derek Thistlewaite's, or I sent it to you, one of the two, and it was essentially, don't grip the bar.
Yeah.
Just let it sit. And I was like, you know what? I fucking tried everything else. I tear my thumb every week. I was wedging my hand down and like almost trying to
get it super deep,
corkscrew it into the bar to like grip through the webbing of my thumb, which just caused that to rip, which fucking hurt. I was trying everything. So I was like, oh, well, fuck it. Why not just try this? And I tried it, and it like took a couple of goes to like get out of my head grip, because opposite to you, like I was gripping right down deep into the palm and trying to hold it there, and the first thing that would go, it would just slide down my hand, and then I'd drop the fucking thing every time. Could not lock it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every single week, I could not lock it. I'd get it to just before lockout, and it'd drop. And so I tried it, and basically didn't drop a deadlift again.
Yeah, a few times I've hook gripped,
which sounds very counterintuitive to everything we're ever taught about. If you want to grip something, you like grab it.
Yeah, that was the problem.
This was the opposite. It's like, no, don't grab it. Just kind of let it sit there, just gently. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, because it's different, because it isn't grip strength. Like it's not. There's literally no grip strength in it. It's
quite literally your thumb interlocking. That's
kind of your thumb is a strap.
Yep.
If you want to think of it like using straps in a deadlift, it's the same thing, but using your thumb. With a couple of times I've experimented with it just for curiosity's sake. That's been the hardest thing to wrap my head around with it, is like fucking, because it's actually been the same when I've been doing cleans here, right? Very similar concept in that, like when I kind of, when the cleans are getting up to a certain weight, I like overthink it and I'll over pull it because I'm strong enough to just kind of like upright row the weights that I'm doing, and just kind of like throw it away from myself and end up fucking it completely. Whereas if I just didn't put in, sounds like silly, but like not as much effort, like not as much like trying too hard, I think it would be fine most of the time.
More fluidity.
And the same is the hook grip though, because I'll do like a first rep or a last warm up or whatever, and like nail it, and I'm like, oh, it feels fucking on, here we go. And then when it came to the top set or whatever, when I knew it was heavy and I knew like I have to put in a little bit more effort now, or a little bit more focus, or however you want to view that, like I'd go through my setup in my head, and then I'll think like, grip it that little bit harder because it is heavier, and then that would actually ruin it and make it way harder to grip. So like I couldn't get my head around that with the short amount of time that I spent on it. So
it wasn't it wasn't a short amount of time. I think we spent 6 months just practicing it. Just
for yourself.
Yeah. I remember we started with pauses.
Yeah.
And I
clusters and shit.
I started back down at like 150.
Yeah.
So we dropped it right back. Like my deadlift at that time was 270, and we started all the way back at 150. And it was just like, okay, cool. 3 sets of 5, as many hook as you can.
Yeah.
Next week, try beat it.
Yeah.
Next week, try beat it. And then it just slowly but steadily. Repetition. I think the best I pulled hook was a triple at 250 or double at 250.
Yeah.
And then basically, worked all the way up to comp 300.
Yeah.
And now I'm very comfortable. Like we talk about skill and things like that. Like I didn't deadlift basically from my comp in November all the way until middle of February this year. So it's a fair amount of time. No deadlifting whatsoever, no hook grip, no nothing. Took me 2 sessions and it was pretty well back to normal.
Yeah.
Like in terms of how it felt.
Yeah, come back quick.
Doing a stiff bar too, which sucks.
Yeah, it's bigger bar. Those couple of millimeters
make a big difference when you've got small little fat thumbs.
Yeah, well, we've gone down the rabbit hole of hook grip here, but like with grip strength in general, like that's just one of the potential kind of options that you have to solve the problem of a bar moving. Before you get to that, I would be looking at like other things, the simple things like changing the position in your hand, like I was talking about. If it's an issue with like the hand cast, like you're building up huge ass calluses and then they're ripping off, try not building up huge calluses. The way that you pull, as in like if you are a really Yankee sort of like you don't build tension very well and you kind of like just go from 0 to 100 into the bar and just run into a wall. Obviously it's like tug of war in a way, in that like, you know, if you just try and not build any tension at the start and then when the ref says go, you just run, and like it's a lot harder to hold on to that. Like it'll just slip out of your hands, yank out of your hands.
Yeah.
So you want to build tension and just really gradually build it, tension in your hands, and then you'll have a lot better chance of holding onto it. So there are a few options there that I can think of. You can think of anything else kind of like that would just be like simple things to look at first. But then...
not necessarily anything in particular. I know people always like, oh, what about grip strength, and I think it just comes with time.
Yeah,
like
well,
it's one of those things that, like, I believe you and Anthony did specific grip strength work for a while there. Or Anthony was doing specific grip strength work.
Well, that's what I was about to say. Yeah, because he definitely has a similar issue yourself. Kind of shorter fingers, chubby hands, and no real reason for it. We've fucked around with the grip a lot and can't find an immediate solution to it. So for him, what we've done is over the year, depending on like proximity to competition and stuff, we'll work on like literally grip strength, as in like wrist and hand sort of strength, hypertrophy.
Yep.
So things like wrist curls or hangs for time and like I don't know, little different wrist rotation and
radial and ulnar deviation stuff
with like a dowel or something like super light, like things like that to just build up general kind of wrist and grip strength in general across the board. And then as we get closer to comp, we'll typically just do like holds, like longer holds that are more specific to deadlifting.
Yep.
So
yeah, I think people do underestimate the power of holding the bar at the top.
Yeah.
Like that's genuinely, like, you'll see people, they'll work all the way up, they'll hit their top set, and the first thing they do is the second they lock out, they either throw the bar down or they're dropping straight away. And I remember that was something I worked on with Honza through his last prep. I was like, all right, dude, just hold for 2 seconds. Just give me 2 seconds at the top. That's it. When you're standing at the top, there's not realistically much more force moving forwards or backwards or anything like that. Like if you're locked solid, it should be okay to hold for a couple of seconds.
Yep.
And by him doing that, he basically didn't drop a bar again the whole prep.
Yeah.
Just spending that extra couple of seconds at the top, just getting it used to it.
Yeah. And you can do longer holds. You could do even just some people will do like overweight sort of holds, as in like they'll do like a heavy ass like high pin pull or block pull or something like that with weight that they couldn't deadlift, at least, you know, not for reps or not, you know, not without a lot of fatigue coming with it. So they'll do that and then hold like a weight that's super maximal or whatever. It's a lot of effort for something that may not work. I don't know. I prefer just do your fucking sets and then maybe a longer hold on the last rep, or if you struggle with setting up, like as in setting your grip, and sometimes you nail it and the grip's not an issue, and then other times you miss it, then something like clusters where you have to set up over and over and over and over.
Yep.
Yeah, it really depends on like why you're failing the grip strength.
Yeah.
And then if you run out of options, then it's like Anthony's situation where you're working on kind of little things that could attribute and get stronger actual hands over time.
I feel like unless you're someone like Anthony, though, who I guess would be classed as elite, and he's deadlifting 400 plus.
Yeah.
Unless you're him.
Oh, if you're deadlifting 200 and you're going like, fuck, my grip strength is...
fairly little of the time an issue.
Yeah.
I had one of the boys in here 2 weeks ago. He was doing his top set of deadlifts. We had a set of 5. He could only get through 3 and could not hold the next 2. Like, his grip was just dropping. And I was like, okay, well, we definitely need to work on this because, like, you physically can't get through your sets. And the next week, we actually put the weight up by 10 kilos. And he got through it because he just used a different bar with less aggressive knurling. I was like, okay, cool. So now we just need to spend a little bit more time on the bar that we're going to be using on the actual day.
Yeah.
With the more aggressive knurling to just build up that tolerance in your hands.
Yeah.
Because clearly it's not a grip issue. You don't have a grip strength issue.
Yeah.
Your hands are just soft.
Yeah.
Delicate.
And you're soft.
Yeah.
I don't know who it was, so I can say that.
Hopefully he doesn't listen to this because he'll know it's about him.
The last sort of thing that we had to cover, and it kind of falls back into some of these past things that we've talked about a little bit, is back rounding, hip shooting up, which might sound like completely different issues, but typically a very similar issue.
Yes.
In that, well, sometimes, but it's sometimes for slightly different reasons. But usually, unless it's like a past, we're going to rule out like past injuries and stuff because that's obviously going to change how you move a little bit, and it's kind of a little bit unique to individuals, so we can leave that out. But typically, it comes back to your start position, as in like the bar's right up against your shins and your knees have nowhere to travel, so you stiff leg the crap out of it.
Too far back. You
As
have
in
to
like
squat
your hips
into
to
it.
shoot up, which is what we're saying, hip shooting up.
Yep.
If it's out over your toes, really far in front of you, and you're going into like a squat pattern to try and do it, like you can't hinge like we were saying, and so you start squatting it, then since the bar's out in front of you, your body's going to have to try and like balance that out, so you don't fall on your face, and again, either your hips are going to shoot up to try and counterbalance that, or your back's going to round over, or probably some combination of the two.
Yep.
And lead to more issues further up, like at lockout and stuff like that. You're just not going to have the leverage that you should have if you were able to kind of stay in your hips. But yeah, I would say your start position is going to do a whole lot for those. Some other things like the queuing of the lats and stuff like that, sometimes that's a really simple way to keep your upper back from getting yanked out of position. Sometimes it works, depending on exactly what the reason is. It might also work to keep the bar centered, so like it's not being forced out in front of you or whatever. If you have a little bit of issues with your setup position, so like all of these these other issues that we talked about can cause like the backgrounding hip shooting up thing. So if you're having that issue, I guess what I'm saying is look at your start position, see if you can change your feet and or grip placement, your start position. If you can get into your hips well, you can hinge well. Cueing your upper back / brace.
Yep.
They come into it in terms of just like whole rigidity through it.
Yep.
And realistically, if things are still going really off track, as in like back rounding or hip shooting up to a significant degree where it's an issue, then maybe you haven't fixed one of those previous issues and you thought you have, or
I think a really important quick note on that is with relation to back rounding, it's not the devil. What I tend to try and explain to people with relation to back rounding is if you start in a slightly flexed position, I start in a slightly flexed position. I know you start in a little bit more of a neutralish position. I would say I'm fairly flexed throughout my whole back, throughout the whole thing. But one thing I would say to people is like, it doesn't move through the lift. If the back rounds and continues to worsen, that's obviously generally when issues arise.
Much bigger problem.
That's where the issues arise from. But if you start in a little bit more of that flexed position, generally you'll see like people are fairly quick off the floor with that. And then as you said, like the lockout becomes a little bit more harder for them sometimes and things like that. So yeah, I think it's
if you start in a more flexed position through the upper back, you got a lot of leverage off the floor, but then lockout's going to be harder.
Yeah.
And then vice versa if you start really.
Yeah.
My issue hasn't been lockout, but around my knees.
Mm.
And that's just like, if you look at my deadlift and how it is, like where it should be, that's the failing point. That's the weak point in it. But yeah, I guess that's a good point in terms of like the back rounding not being super bad. Yeah, if you're a friggin' fishing rod and kind of as the weight continues to leave the floor and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like we said it straight at the start. Like obviously we don't like using the terms good, bad, etc. But like people know, like there's a difference between me looking like the Pixar light when I deadlift and me being slightly flexed when I deadlift.
Yeah, I think it's easy enough to
differentiate between them.
Yeah, exactly. And what you said, which is like if it's progressively getting more and more rounded, because if you're getting progressively more and more rounded, it means that your leverages are off and your lockout's going to be a really not fun time.
If you lock it out at all.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to, and even if you do lock it out, you're absolutely putting a lower ceiling on your deadlift potential than if you were to solve that to some degree. But yeah, a little bit of thoracic rounding, a little bit of like movement, a little bit of just general rounding that is the same off the floor as it is at the top is not going to be an issue. And sometimes just a leverage thing, sometimes just a how you built thing to some degree. But that doesn't mean that I would try to do it either a lot of the time.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna coach people into it. Yeah, I think that's
I think that covers everything.
I
I guess from start to finish, like just to summarize it for people, you can kind of see how each point we made
overlaps
can feed into the next. It can be one thing, it can be two things, it can be multiple of the all, and then coming down to the back end of it with relation to setup, like these all play a part in your setup. So if one of these things is sort of out of whack and your setup is feeling a little bit off, you can go to one of these things and start to play around and make some changes for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just spend time and consistency. Consistency is going to be the biggest thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's sometimes hard to identify that first domino when all these things overlap. Like, what's the thing that I need to work on to make it, improve? Well, where do I start?
You contact us.
Either do that and we can help, but like pulling back the weight a little bit or doing a variation like a pause deadlift or something that's like a little less loadable, and seeing what happens in that and kind of scaling back and looking for a weight where not as many things are breaking down, and maybe you can see the sort of the first thing that pops its head. Things like strategies like that can be really useful too.
Yeah, we said it throughout. RDLs. If you can do an RDL pretty decent, you can hinge.
Yep.
Your back doesn't round at the bottom, so your lats are staying fairly well on the whole time. Then generally it's probably not a hinge or a lat issue.
Yeah.
And start to look at some other things. Maybe it's the foot placement or something like that. So
chip away at the issues.
Yeah, just
rule things out.
Break things down and sort of have a look at what you can do them in manageable pieces instead of just being like, no, I'm just going to add more load and see what happens.
Yeah. Unless you're in a powerlifting prep and you're towards the end and you just have to fucking yellow it a bit.
Send it. PRER.
Yeah. Cool. We'll leave it there. If anybody else has any deadlift issues, message me or Josh on Instagram, and we'll bring it up in a future episode. Even if you have any videos and you're really not sure about your deadlift issues and where to start and what to do about it,
contact us. We
hit
can
us
help.
up, and we might we'll help you in some way, whether it's private or whether we throw it up on fucking Instagram or some shit and make a post about it or whatever. We'll help you in some way. We'll come to some sort of
I think it'd be cool.
In that.
Reach out, ask us questions. Always happy to help, answer questions where we can.
Sweet.
Lovely.
Thank you for listening to the Nexus Unloaded podcast. Be sure to jump on our website to find details on everything mentioned in the podcast today, plus information on our coaching, mentoring, and gyms based in the Gold Coast and Townsville. Make sure you follow us on our Instagram for any updates on what we are currently doing, and we'll see you all in the next episode.